We should get it today. Let's move that concept worksheet to Monday. Okay? Okay. So that's the big one. So let's move that to Monday, even though I know you're busy this weekend with prom. But let's move that to Monday because you are correct. We have not gone through all of those notes yet. Yes. Yes. Other ones due tomorrow. You could do the other one. Yes. Tell me. Do you have a study hall? Email me which one you need then. Okay. All right. Come during another class period that they'll let you come the last 5 minutes so we can figure out what it is, okay? All right. So we are on Cold War confrontations in Latin America. That is page 131. There's not a lot that we need to discuss about Latin America except the number 2 and number 3. Number 2 is called the Bay of Pigs. Bay of Pigs is in Cuba. President Kennedy inherits from Eisenhower this whole big CIA-backed scheme to get rid of Fidel Castro. Fidel Castro has taken over Cuba. He is a communist, has taken the whole island of Cuba except for our little teeny tiny Navy base that we still have, Guantanamo Bay. The CIA has been trying to get rid of Castro. They've done all kinds of crazy things. They've sent him exploding cigars, all kinds of things. They didn't work. Just note to self, if you're trying to kill somebody, an exploding cigar doesn't work unless it's the size of dynamite. So what they attempt, and this is, again, an issue that a lot of people have with the CIA, that the invasion of a sovereign nation that has an elected official, even though we don't like who it is, it's a communist, it's Castro, it is in our backyard. It's, less than 30 miles from Florida. So we feel very threatened. What'd you say?
I said I thought it was like
90. Is it 90? I never get it right, but it's close.
Yeah.
It's a boat ride close. You're probably right about 90. Every now and then I'll say like 13 miles, but I know it's not that. So we back an invasion in 1961. The invasion is going to fail miserably. It does not. And the reason it fails mostly is because the Cubans are not upset with being communist. Cubans are okay with this. There's not a wide support of this invasion. When the invasion fails, Kennedy refuses to rescue the insurgents and they have to surrender. Widely denounced as a fiasco, Bay of Pigs defeat damages the United States' credibility around the world. This is a black check mark for the United States, is the Bay of Pigs. This failure, along with continuing American covert efforts to assassinate Castro, pushed the dictator closer to an alliance with the Soviet Union. Please put a box around that because that's where we're headed next. So Castro takes Cuba. He doesn't really have a connection with the Soviet Union yet, but this reaction with the United States is going to push this closer, which is going to lead us to probably the closest the United States and the world has come to a nuclear a catastrophe or a nuclear war. It's called the Cuban Missile Crisis, October 1962. In October 1962, what happens is the Soviets now have a ally in our hemisphere. And so what they want to do is put missiles on Cuba that could attack the United States. So the United States at this point is fairly secure that the Russians do not have any nuclear missiles that can get on our homeland. We have lots in Europe that can get to them, but they don't have any that can get to us. That's our fail-safe security, that they would have to launch something from a ship or planes in order to attack us. When the Soviets begin thinking about putting missiles in Cuba, we have an all-out crisis. So how do they know that this is going to happen? What happens with our satellite systems, our spy satellite systems, is as they rotate around the world, they just take pictures. They take pictures and they take a gazillion pictures. When planes fly over, a gazillion pictures. And what these spies are looking at, what these intelligence officers are looking for, are changes. Anything changed? Is a road being built? Are things being dug? Are there increased traffic? And over Cuba, over a period of time of about 3 or 4 weeks, these intelligence officers notice there is something happening. And it looks like to them that that Cuba is getting a patch of land ready for missiles. And these missiles are going to go down into the ground. That's where they stay until they're launched. It obviously creates a huge dilemma and a huge security issue for the United States. So for 2 weeks, the United States and the Soviets are in a war of chicken, for lack of a better word. Soviets have put their missiles on a ship. They are headed to Cuba. Kennedy says, we are making a blockade. You are not crossing this line. There is always a tick-tock clock to doomsday, with doomsday being a nuclear explosion. I'm sure it's still ticking now. We shouldn't be anywhere close. But we were probably as close to a nuclear war in the Cuban Missile Crisis than we have been in any other instances. What happens is Kennedy holds the line. Kennedy holds that line, and the ships get really close. Our Navy ships are saying, come closer, we're going. There is what is used in Navy terms, firing a shot over the bow, meaning here's your warning shot. Or for those of us that know the firing shot in the air, I'm warning you that I've got a gun and I'm going to shoot. And thankfully what happens is the Soviets blink and they turn their ships back around. And this event causes great fear in the United States. So we have this fear that, okay, this communist nation is here. They're going to have nuclear weapons. And the ability of Kennedy to stand firm on that and potentially take us to nuclear war is, again, one of those things that elevates the status of Kennedy. But it also, again, asserts this fear of how close we are to this nuclear type of intervention. So that is happening in 1962. Also in 1962, Kennedy is trying to manage what is happening in Vietnam. So in the early 50s, when France pulls out of their colonial holdings of Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, the Soviets and China start to move in. And we then will have a North and South Vietnam. North is communist, just like North Korea communist, North Vietnam is communist. South Vietnam is somewhat democratic, not a lot. We sent military advisors to try and help solve this problem and to ensure that the communism does not spread. Remember, our idea is to contain communism. So in 1964, we have an incident in the Gulf of Tonkin. The Gulf of Tonkin is right outside of Vietnam. This is really important. And the word alleged is incredibly important. The United States alleged that North Vietnamese torpedo boats launched an unprovoked attack against the United States destroyers in the Gulf of Tonkin. That is what the United States said. We know now, about 50 years later, this was not true. It's not true. It did not happen. Didn't happen. Kind of like Abraham Lincoln and his spot resolutions. Show me where that happened. This did not happen. It was made up so that we could attack Vietnam. So that's what's going to happen. The Gulf of Tonkin resolution. Congress responded to the unsubstantiated report. Unsubstantiated. No proof, no corroborating evidence from any branch of the military, Not even the CIA. The CIA couldn't even make up good enough evidence, and that's what they do. Overwhelmingly passed the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. The resolution authorized President Johnson to take all necessary measures to repel any armed attack against the forces of the United States and to prevent further aggression. Presidents since then have used this as a mandate to use military force whenever they needed to without addressing Congress, who has the authority to make war. So that becomes a really big stretch of executive power. The Gulf of Tonkin resolution gave President Johnson a blank check to escalate an undeclared war in Vietnam. Undeclared. Within a short time, Johnson begins to escalate the number of troops in Vietnam dramatically. So dramatically, we are going to increase those troops that are moving into Vietnam. The Tet Offensive in 1968, first, just so that you know, Tet is New Year's Day, New Year's Eve for the Vietnamese. So we think, like many times in war, that on holidays, the other people kind of go on a de-escalation. It's one of their major holidays. So the powers that be say to our forces, we can kind of stand down. This is a big holiday. Nothing's going to be happening. Stupid. Because guess when the best time is to attack? When the other guys think that you're having a holiday celebration, which is why Washington attacked the Hessians on Christmas, right? Because he knew those Germans would be drunk from New Year's Eve. Let's attack. We don't have any hope of beating them. We're going to attack on Christmas Day, which is why we won that little battle, which is why the Tet Offensive is going to be so horrific, because we make that mistake. So late January 1968, the Viet Cong are communists. Viet Cong are communist North Koreans, suddenly launched a series of attacks on 27 key cities. This is not a small attack. This is a major escalation. We now have 27 things under attack on a time period when we think the Vietnamese or the Viet Cong are going to be celebrating. And it is disastrous. It is horrific. And this is when the public starts asking, what the heck is going on in Vietnam? Why is our strategy so horrible that we continue to lose these things? So Viet Cong were eventually forced to retreat after suffering heavy losses. But what happens is the Tet Offensive undermines Johnson's credibility. As a result of the Tet Offensive in 1968, public support for the war decreased. So this is the beginning of the public questioning what we're doing in Vietnam. And please underline this, anti-war sentiment increases. Also, in our notes somewhere, this is, again, where we institute a draft. So Vietnam is a draft. The way that you can stay out of the draft is to continue education. So if you're a college student, you're not eligible for the draft. If you're in a master's program, you're not eligible for the draft. If you're in a PhD program, you're not eligible for the draft. So for the most part, if you had access to education, you did not get drafted. So the people that got drafted were people who could not afford education, poor people, minorities. And so Vietnam becomes a war fought by poor people and minorities. And that, again, becomes part of this anti-war movement. That demographic of men old enough to be drafted has the highest number of PhD population than any other. They're statistically, and even in the state of Indiana, statistically, people in the state of Indiana in the 21st century that get college degrees is less than about 30%. Then when you add masters, we get smaller, and when you get PhDs, you're in the single digits. This group of men, the PhDs is somewhere around 20%, which is an anomaly. I can't even say that word. Statistically, it doesn't make any sense, except your parents are trying to keep you out of a war. So yes, we're going to keep having you go to college. So this becomes a war that are mostly fought by minorities and will mostly be fought by poor people. And as far as the draft, not the people that have already enlisted. So Vietnam is also, there's going to be two things that really change the course of social history in our country. One is going to be Vietnam, and the other is going to be Watergate. Watergate is the President Nixon's spying on the Republican National Party headquarters to get information to help him win his reelection. So we have two things. We have a very political thing, Watergate, that's going to change forever the way we deal with the office of the presidency because of newspapers, right? So one of the things that I think was very shocking to a lot of you was that no reporters ever reported anything about FDR being in a wheelchair. In the times that we live in, that's just like, how did that happen? How is that possible? And it was a respect between the office of the presidency and reporters. What changes that forever will be Nixon and the way Nixon deals with reporters. The society of the United States is going to be radically transformed by Vietnam. And again, my personal history of this is an explanation of how that changed as a group and a society. So in 1968, at the height of this Tet Offensive, I am living in Okinawa. Okinawa is an island that was used as a support base for Vietnam. So from Vietnam, there were two places that or injuries or fatalities or helicopter evac people went. One was the Philippines and the other was Okinawa. Okinawa supplied especially the Air Force, with bombers and planes, and one of those was Agent Orange. Agent Orange was a foliage, Agent Orange was like a fertilizer that destroyed foliage. It was like a heavy-duty Roundup, and that was one of the things that B-52s would drop in these jungles, was these defoliant, so the jungle would wipe out and they could see everybody. That's what a lot of people, including my dad, died from, is just the idea. Same thing like Roundup with farmers, putting your hands in fertilizer, that you're not supposed to do that. So as a kid, we had, and because of what my dad did, we had a lot of young, and that was where rotation for R&R, rest and relaxation. So if you were in jungle or if you were in country for 6 months, you had 3 weeks of a R&R, rest and relaxation. And there were just a few places that you were allowed to go. South China Beach in the Philippines, Okinawa was one. So we had a lot, because of what my dad did, we had a lot of young pilots in and out around our house all the time. My parents threw these wild, crazy parties where we were stuck in our bedroom trying to figure out what they were doing. One of the most wild and craziest ones was slingshots with cherry bombs. I would not advise that at all. I think most everyone was highly, bless you, highly intoxicated playing this game of slingshots with cherry bomb fireworks. Crazy. What? No, don't try it. So my first memories, because I started kindergarten. So I went to kindergarten, first and second grade. So my first memories are of living in this very insulated, 100% military community where everybody's dad, and I have to say dad because at that point, if you were a kid, your mom could not be in the military because your mom would have had to got out. So surrounded by every kid. My school was the Air Force school. Everybody did what we did. Our dads were either worked on the flight line or pilots. Everybody knew. And I was in this little insulated community that everybody loved what everybody did. Every day at 5 o'clock, the flag went down. We all stopped what we were doing, no matter what we were doing, playing on the playground, riding our bikes. Everybody stopped. And then as soon as the colors came down, we could play again, not even a thought in our head. That's indoctrination. If you ever want to know what indoctrination means, that you can have 7-year-old kids riding their bikes on a road and hear that song and everybody just stop. And we don't say anything. I did that my whole life, even as a teenager, even as a teenager, everybody did that. In May of 1974, we come back to the United States. I am now getting ready to start the third grade, so my memories are really good. And one of the things that always happens when you move back is, which is a really nice thing that the military does, they always have these little get-togethers with kids, and they talk to the kids like, this is what you should expect. This is the base you're going to. This is, and then always at the end, which my dad never ever got stationed in Hawaii, but the kids that were getting ready to get stationed in Hawaii, they always got an extra talk. I don't know what it was about, but every time it was always like, and if your dad is going to hick them, you need to stand back and wait. I never know what they're about. So we get our little talk, and our little talk is about the idea that not everybody appreciates the military as much as we do, and that the base that your dad's going to be stationed to, the school is off base, so you will have interactions with, and we just listen. And then my dad, as he gets his orders, always has things. Well, if any of you travel often in airports, you always see people, I think, in their military dress. And that's because if you are active duty and you're traveling, you always have to wear your uniform. Always. You can't travel in your other clothes because you have to be prepared if you get called up for anything. So if you're traveling, you have to be in your uniform. Obviously, unless you're on vacation. So my dad, we always traveled in his uniform, but we were flying into Travis Air Force Base, which is San Francisco. And so my dad was told not to wear his uniform. And that was weird. My mom understood why, because we were getting ready to go into San Francisco, the height of anti-war movements. And my dad, I'm wearing my uniform. My mom, you were told not to. I don't care. I'm wearing my uniform. And so when we got off the airport and got into Travis Air Force Base, we understood why my dad should not have worn his uniform, because my dad was yelled at through the whole airport. It's very scary, probably one of the second scariest things in my life. With my dad, it was very weird. Got called a lot of names, a ton of names. And then when we got to our base in Texas with our school that was off base, every single day of the fourth grade, every single day, there were protesters standing outside of the fence where we played with signs telling us that our dad was a baby killer. Your dad's a baby killer. How many babies did your dad kill? And I'm in the fourth grade. Like, I don't know. I don't even know what you're talking about. I don't know. And that becomes what happens with Vietnam. It becomes such a divisive entity that it really splits our society. And at the bottom of that page, the groups, the anti-war movement and the counterculture, and they become a very powerful group. Our current Secretary of State, John Kerry, was a very decorated Vietnam War veteran. He was on PT boats. He went up the Mekong Delta, and those people on those PT boats, and they are very small boats that had probably about 10 people assigned to those boats. I mean, they were attacked. The fatality rate on those PT boats were really high, and he was a highly decorated. He's now our Secretary of State. And one of the first things that he does when he comes back is takes all of his medals and threw them in the Potomac River, because his beliefs in what he was doing was so counterproductive to what he, again, takes a lot of flack on that. And men returning from Vietnam, many of them have that similar experience. A really awesome movie for if you want to get any kind of experience about Vietnam is called Born on the 4th of July. It's a fantastic movie to understand the dichotomy that was going on in the minds of these military men who enlisted, or because I think he enlisted, to do a duty. And then when they got there, they were like, what the heck are we doing here? What is this even about? And that becomes a problem with Vietnam. What was this about? What were we trying to do? And it becomes an unwinnable war for us. And that, again, is a problem, that we're sending troops and men and money to fight something, number one, we don't understand, and number two, that we don't win. And what will happen in 1974 and 75 is Saigon will fall, and we will get just this horrific outpouring of people from Vietnam trying to leave, especially those that helped or supported the United States. And again, that will happen, that same base in Texas, right? Probably about 6 months after, we get a large influx of Vietnamese. And a lot of those Vietnamese would be settled on bases as well because of their connection with the military. So during the 60s, we're going to have a lot of these protest groups, and most all of them begin by protesting the Vietnam War. During the 60s, the following group protested: African Americans. African Americans are going to protest on the double, obviously, for equality, but also the fact that they were highly represented in the army in Vietnam. One of the things that's going to happen in Vietnam as well is this huge drug culture. There will be lots and lots and lots of people shipping drugs home in body bags. Like, body bags are the size of bodies, and they will be full of heroin. It just spirals out of all types of what we expect in wartime, what we expect from our military. Lots of active duty men will be on drugs as a way to alleviate the terror, the fear. And if you know anyone that served in Vietnam, number one, they most often don't talk about it. Number two, they have a tremendous post-traumatic stress syndrome. You could not wake my dad up because he would wake up flying, because my dad would do 6 months in country and then 6 months back home, and 6 months in country, 6 months back home. And it was really devastating. And if you know anyone that served in any family member, it was really devastating. So also protesting will be American Indians. American Indians will be protesting, and they will use Wounded Knee as one of their places where they begin their protest. They'll take over that with weapons. It's really, really interesting that just last week, some of the representatives of South Dakota state legislature have petitioned the United States Army to remove medals of honor from men who won medals of honor at the Battle of Wounded Knee. Their letter says that the United States Army should not be in the honor, or should not be in the business of honoring men who slaughtered women and children, and we think that those medals of honors should be revoked. It'll be interesting to see what happens. This has happened before, when Medal of Honor recipients had their medal stripped from Civil War, and I'm trying to think which other one. There was another one I can't think of. But it'll be interesting if that happens. Women will begin protesting. One of the awesome things that women will do in their protest, I'm still not sure how it goes, other than people like to burn things. So draft dodgers were burning their draft cards. Women were burning their bras. I'm not sure what the connection was. I don't know. But that becomes kind of again, like saying a pinko commie would be to a woman. So are you one of those bra burners? I don't even know what that means. But it's similar to the fact of, like, what I discussed last week, my mom trying to wear pants. My mom trying to wear pants to the officers club. My dad was not, that was not done. My mom was not going to be allowed to wear pants. And for those of you that have really strong moms, I'm sure you can't imagine your dad trying to tell your mom what to wear and then your mom wearing it. But that, again, was this idea of what that was supposed to do. Probably the thing that most of you are aware of with the 60s would be the youth. And we have to think about why the youth at this point would be protesting. And part of that is conformity. Part of that is the idea that everyone has to conform. And just as a reflection of even my short time period as a teacher, and I don't know what Northview's rules are any longer, but when I started there was two really hard, fast rules that could get you sent to the alternative school. If your hair was not a normal, natural color, alternative school. If you had a facial piercing, alternative school. Straight to the alternative school. No questions asked. Now, I would hope and I would think that that has changed, that there are rules. But when I started there was a lady that was her job, was to get people. And you knew when she showed up at the door that somebody had a facial piercing and they were going to the alternative school. And not that the alternative school is bad. I taught a couple of sections there. I love those kids that work there. I learned lots and lots of things from them, probably more than they learned from me. But what happens with the youth is when you are, as young people, put in a box and not allowed to move out of that box, when you get to a place that allows you to move out of that box, like college, that's when those things happen. Woodstock, any of the youth movements in Michigan. Michigan is really the beginning of the youth movement. And I know that sounds weird, Michigan, but on the campus of the University of Michigan, what happens is students start asking their professors to have courses that make sense. There should be a woman's study. There should be an African American study. And this is what we want. We want to be taught these things. We're paying for this education. We should be allowed to teach that. And so the University of Michigan will become one of the big front runners. Hispanic Americans will also have, this will be my mom and the table grapes. At this time, a lot of those different groups of people go through kind of an identity. Like if we were really going to look at the Hispanic Americans, what they would have called themselves are Chicanos, that was the time period of Chicanos. African Americans at that time, it was black power. So the identity of these groups of people also undergo a change in how they want to be recognized. And the issues on that next page are very simple. The Vietnam War. That one is huge. It's just gigantic. It's so big, and it crossed so many divides of families and the people that were affected by that. One of the other really important parts of the Vietnam War is prisoners of war, POWs. So everyone, especially if you were in the military, I have looked and looked for my bracelet. I cannot find it anywhere. Had a POW bracelet that you wore for someone's name, and you kept that on as a reminder that these men were being held. One of the most famous prisoners was John McCain. He was a pilot, a Navy pilot. He was shot down, arms broken, and he was held for almost 4 years in what was called, bless you, Hanoi Hilton. He was tortured horrifically. If you ever see or looked at pictures of McCain, he always looked really stilted and weird because his hands were always held out like this. It's because he couldn't move his hands. He could not lift his hands because John McCain was a very prized prisoner because his dad was Secretary of the Navy. And John McCain several times could have been released. They told him they would release him, but he would not be released. Inside POW camps, there are rules of engagement, and the rules of engagement are longest held prisoner first. So John McCain was not going to leave as an officer until these longer prisoners were sent out first. No one understood at this time that they were being tortured. One of the torture and one of the reasons John McCain lost the movement of his arms and his shoulders was he was tied with his elbows together and then hung from the ceiling for several hours at a time. Many of these men did break and gave public speeches written by the Viet Cong about the horrific things that the United States was doing. And one man in particular, Jeremiah Denton, did this. But while the CIA was watching this speech, somebody noticed his eyes. Look at his eyes. What's going on? Why is he blinking? What's he doing? And eventually they figured out he was blinking SOS. So that is our first clue that something really bad was happening to these prisoners of war. My 8th grade science teacher, Mr. Bates, was this giant man who had no fingernails because the Viet Cong had pulled out all of his fingernails. So it was horrific. It was really, really, really bad. He was a really nice man, except one day, one of my classmates took my shoes as a funny joke. I didn't think it was funny. Mr. Bates knew who took my shoes. He thought it was hilarious. Keep your shoes on your feet. I'm like, it's Texas. It's hot. My feet need to breathe. So I went like the rest of the day without my shoes, which was not fun. But that was Mr. Bates. And it affected a lot of people in very dramatic ways. The exclusion of women from mainstream U.S. life finally hits the fan. This is Betty Friedan, the feminine mystique. That question of, is this all I get to do, right? And this confrontation. Again, if you have Hulu, I think it's on Hulu, Mrs. America, it's an 8-part series, but it is well worth your time. Increasing bureaucracy and impersonal nature of the United States, marginal economic status of minorities, and the materialism of the United States. So we will finish this up hopefully tomorrow.